It was 1 a.m. in Manhattan's crown jewel, the kind of building where the lobby smelled like imported orchids and the cheapest apartment cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Far above the city, on the rooftop, the pool glowed like a rectangle of liquid sapphire. Steam curled off the surface into the chilly night air, and the hum of traffic below felt like a faint heartbeat under the stillness. Caleb broke the water's surface with a gasp, his skin glistening under the pool lights. 32 years old, lean from years of hard work, but right now he was just a man, naked, shivering, droplets running down his back. His chest rose and fell as he reached the pool's edge, gripping it with calloused hands before pulling himself out. He didn't reach for a towel. He didn't even look at the city skyline stretching beyond the glass railing. His eyes went straight to her. Vivian Cole sat on a chaise lounge like she was posing for an oil painting, her silk robe a deep shade of crimson that caught the light from the champagne in her hand. She was 60, but carried it like it was an accessory, her posture perfect, her presence magnetic. There was no makeup smudge, no hair out of place, just that unreadable smile she wore like armor. "You were slower tonight," she said, her voice warm but edged with something else. "Water's colder," Caleb replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. The pool was always kept at a precise 82 degrees, just the way she liked it. Vivian set her champagne flute on the glass side table, the faint clink echoing in the quiet. From beneath her robe, she reached into a leather pouch and pulled out an envelope, thick, heavy. She placed it neatly on the table beside her, like an offering. 50,000, she said softly. "Same as always." Caleb stepped closer, water still dripping from his hair. He picked up the envelope, feeling the crisp weight of cash inside. He didn't need to count it. Vivian Cole had never shorted him. Behind them, the wind whispered against the glass railing, carrying faint sounds from the streets below, honking cabs, muffled music from some late-night rooftop party blocks away. But here, up in this world of marble and glass, it felt like they were alone in another universe. There had been whispers in the building for months. Strange noises at odd hours, people spotting Caleb heading up to the penthouse long after the staff had gone home. The kind of gossip that thrived in places like this, where the walls were thick, but curiosity was thicker. The residents didn't dare ask Vivian directly. They watched from behind their gold-plated door handles, inventing their own versions of the truth. Some thought Caleb was her secret lover. Others said he was blackmailing her. A few joked that he was some kind of paid pet she kept around for amusement. But no one guessed the real arrangement. Caleb had stopped trying to explain it to himself weeks ago. At first, it had seemed like a joke, an eccentric rich woman's harmless quirk. Swim naked in her rooftop pool, take the money, go home. But the longer it went on, the more he noticed the details. The way she watched him, never looking away, her eyes following every stroke, every movement through the water. The way her fingers curled tighter around her glass some nights, as if she was reliving something. And tonight felt different. When he met her gaze, he saw something in her eyes he couldn't name. Not sadness exactly, not pleasure either, something sharper, more dangerous. "Is everything okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Vivian tilted her head, studying him for a long moment before answering. "Perfectly," she said at last, though the word lingered like a lie. She leaned back in her chair, reclaiming her champagne. "Go get dressed, Caleb. You'll catch a chill." He turned toward the glass doors leading back inside, but as he walked, he felt her eyes on him still, tracking him, dissecting him. He resisted the urge to look back, to break whatever spell hung over the night. Inside, the penthouse was as silent as the grave. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below, lights glittering like jewels scattered on black velvet. He caught his reflection in the glass, damp, naked, an envelope of more money than he'd seen in his life tucked under his arm. Somewhere in his chest, a question stirred again. Why me? But as always, he pushed it down. He told himself it didn't matter. After all, $50,000 was $50,000. And yet, as he stepped into the elevator, a chill that had nothing to do with the water crept over him. Tonight didn't feel like just another swim. Something had shifted. And deep down he knew, whatever this was, it was far from over. 6 months earlier, Caleb was standing outside a rundown laundromat in Queens, watching the last $14 in his bank account disappear into a humming washing machine. His phone kept buzzing, missed calls from a debt collector, a friend he owed rent to, and his sister in Atlanta who'd stopped believing he'd ever pay her back. He was 32, tall, sharp-eyed, and carrying the kind of quiet dignity that came from never having much but still holding his head up. But lately, life has been landing one gut punch after another. That week alone, his car had died, his landlord had slipped an eviction notice under his door, and his side hustle delivering groceries had barely covered food for himself. So when his cousin, Marcus, mentioned there was a janitor job opening in a luxury high-rise in Manhattan, good pay, steady hours, free uniform, Caleb didn't hesitate. He showed up the next morning in a thrift store button-up and the only decent shoes he owned. The building's lobby alone felt like stepping into another world. White marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and air so fresh it probably had its own oxygen subscription. The doorman looked him over like a TSA agent with trust issues before letting him through. By some miracle, the building's maintenance manager, Luis, hired him on the spot. "Don't steal anything, keep your mouth shut, and you'll last," Luis had said. It wasn't much of a pep talk, but Caleb wasn't picky. His first weeks were a blur of polishing brass railings, hauling trash, and fixing things residents swore were broken, but just needed batteries. Most of the time, he moved through the hallways like a shadow. The rich tenants barely saw him. That was fine. Invisible was safe. Until the day in the elevator. It was late afternoon. Caleb was riding up from the service level when the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and in stepped Vivian Cole. She didn't look like other residents. They dressed to be seen, all designer logos and loud jewelry. Vivian was elegance turned down low. Her hair, white blonde and swept into a chignon, framed a face that looked like it had never been rushed a day in its life. She wore a cream silk blouse, black trousers, and a faint scent of jasmine that seemed to follow her into the space. For the first 30 seconds, they stood in silence. Caleb kept his eyes fixed on the floor display. Then he noticed it, a delicate gold bracelet sliding down her wrist, one side unclasped. Before it hit the ground, he reached out instinctively and caught it. "You dropped this," he said, holding it out. Vivian glanced down, amused. "Quick hands," she said. "The clasp's bent," Caleb added, turning it in his fingers. Without thinking, he adjusted the tiny latch with the edge of his thumbnail and handed it back, fixed. Her eyebrows lifted, not in surprise but interest. "You're one of the new staff?" "Janitor," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Caleb." "Caleb," she repeated it slowly, like she was testing how it sounded in her mouth. Then, with a faint smile, "I might have something for you. Something unusual." The elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor. She stepped out, heels clicking on the marble, and turned back just long enough to say, "Come to my apartment tomorrow at 10 p.m. Don't tell anyone." The doors closed before he could answer. Caleb stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. The next day, he told himself he wasn't going. He didn't need trouble, and nothing good ever came from rich people's unusual requests. But 9:50 p.m. found him standing in front of her double doors, palms sweating. When she opened them, Vivian was barefoot, wearing a silk robe and holding 2 glasses of wine. "Come in," she said like it was the most natural thing in the world. The penthouse looked like something out of a magazine, polished floors, walls lined with art he was afraid to breathe near, and windows that made the city feel like it belonged to her. She led him to the rooftop, where the pool shimmered under the night sky. The water was steaming, inviting, almost hypnotic. "I have a proposal for you," Vivian began, her tone calm but deliberate. "It's not work you've done before. But it pays well. Extremely well." Caleb folded his arms. "What kind of work?" She smiled faintly. "I'd like you to swim. In my pool. Naked." He blinked, thinking she was joking. "You're serious?" "Completely. You swim, I watch, I pay you $50,000. You do this when I ask, and you keep it between us. That's the only rule." It was insane. It was also more money than he'd made in the past 2 years combined. Caleb's first instinct was to walk away. His second was to ask how soon she wanted him to start. "Tonight," she said, already turning toward the chaise lounge. And just like that, the deal that would change everything began. The rooftop air was warmer than Caleb expected for a spring night in Manhattan. The pool steamed softly, its turquoise glow spilling across the white marble deck like liquid light. He stood there barefoot, in nothing but a pair of black swim trunks he'd worn up from the maintenance locker. In one hand, he held his folded uniform. In the other, the knot in his stomach. Vivian reclined on a low chaise lounge, her crimson silk robe loose at the collar. She held a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light like tiny fireflies. "You'll have to take those off," she said casually, gesturing at his swim trunks without looking away from the water. Caleb hesitated. "Right now. I don't have all night." It was so matter-of-fact, as if she'd just told him to change a light bulb. No flirtation. No smile. Just business. He peeled the trunks down slowly, feeling the heat rise in his face. The night air licked at his skin, sending a shiver up his spine. He stepped toward the pool, eyes fixed on the water because anywhere else felt dangerous. "From the deep end," she instructed, as though she had rehearsed this before. He slipped in, the warmth wrapping around him like a blanket. For a moment, he just floated there, letting the surrealness of it all wash over him. I'm naked, in a billionaire's rooftop pool, and she's watching. He half expected her to pull out a camera or invite guests in for some bizarre party trick, but instead she just sat there, silent, sipping champagne. "Swim," she said without raising her voice. So he did. At first, it was awkward, his strokes clumsy, his breathing uneven. He felt absurd, like a man acting out a scene in a dream he hadn't agreed to. The sound of the water splashing against the marble echoed strangely in the night, filling the space between them. Every time he surfaced, she was still watching. Not in a leering way, not even in a way that suggested pleasure. Her gaze was steady, clinical, like a professor studying a subject for a thesis. Her eyes tracked him from one end of the pool to the other, unblinking, unhurried. After a few laps, his embarrassment began to fade. The pool's warmth loosened his muscles, and he started to swim with more confidence. He told himself it was easy money, nothing more. Just another rich person quirk. The city skyline stretched endlessly behind her, and for a strange, fleeting moment, he felt like he'd crossed into another life entirely. "Stop," she said suddenly. He froze in the water. "Come out." He climbed the pool steps, water cascading down his skin. She reached to her side without ceremony, picked up an envelope, and held it out to him. $50,000, she said, as though she were confirming the weather. He took it, surprised by its weight. No handshake, no small talk, no indication this was anything more than a completed transaction. "Same rules, every time," she continued. "No cameras. No phones. No one hears about this. Not your friends, not your family, not the building staff." Caleb nodded. Understood. She gave a faint, approving smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You can dress inside." The elevators unlocked. And just like that, it was over. Inside the penthouse, he found his clothes folded neatly on a chair by the door, as if someone had placed them there while he was swimming. The whole apartment was still and pristine, not a cushion out of place. It was so quiet, he could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He dressed quickly, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket. His heart was still pounding, not from the swim, but from the strangeness of it all. In the elevator, he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. $50,000 for 20 minutes of swimming. It was absurd. It was amazing. He could pay off the landlord tomorrow. He could eat something that didn't come in a paper bag. But as the elevator descended, a thought crept into his mind, a thought he couldn't quite shake. It was the way she'd watched him. The way her eyes followed every movement, like she wasn't looking at him but through him. It didn't feel like she'd been watching for pleasure. It felt like she'd been measuring him. And somewhere deep inside, Caleb knew that whatever test this was, he'd just passed the first round. The first 50 grand vanished faster than Caleb ever thought possible. 2 weeks after that surreal midnight swim, his overdue rent was paid in full, his credit card balances hit zero, and he was standing in a Fifth Avenue boutique trying on a leather jacket that cost more than his entire wardrobe combined. He'd never been inside a store like this before. The lighting was warm, flattering, almost theatrical. The sales associate, a man in a tailored three-piece suit, hovered nearby with an approving smile, as if Caleb were a visiting dignitary. "This," Caleb said, running his hand over the buttery soft leather, "feels dangerous." "Dangerous?" the man repeated with a grin. "That's exactly the point, sir." When Caleb stepped out of the store wearing it, the city felt different. It wasn't that the sidewalks were cleaner or the skyline brighter, it was that people noticed him now. Heads turned. Doormen gave him that subtle nod reserved for the very wealthy or very important. By the time Vivian called him for the second swim, he'd traded his worn sneakers for Italian loafers and swapped his maintenance hoodie for a crisp white shirt that looked like it belonged in a yacht club. And yet, whenever the elevator carried him back up to her penthouse, it was as if the city fell away. The same silent marble floors. The same glowing rooftop pool. The same envelope, handed over without hesitation. But now, there are rules. "Thursday, 1:17 a.m. exactly," she said on the second call, her tone leaving no room for questions. When he arrived, she stopped him before he could slide into the water. "Tonight, you do not touch the west side of the pool. Not even the tiles. Understand?" Caleb frowned. "Is there something wrong with it?" Her eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Just follow the instructions." The swims became stranger after that. One night she made him pause mid-lap for a full 2 minutes before continuing. Another time she told him to start at the shallow end, but only face east while swimming. Once, she ordered him to keep his eyes closed the entire time. And always, that same steady, unblinking stare from her chaise lounge, champagne glass in hand, the city lights burning behind her like a crown. It wasn't long before people in the building began to notice the changes in Caleb. Mrs. Wallace from 23B cornered him in the lobby one afternoon. She was in her late 70s, all pearls and suspicion. "You've been doing quite well for yourself lately," she said, eyeing his new watch. "Got yourself a little lottery win?" "Something like that," Caleb said, forcing a polite smile. By the time he reached the elevator, he could feel her still watching him, no doubt filing the moment away for her next gossip session with the other tenants. The whispers grew. The janitor who suddenly wore $1,000 shoes. The guy who tipped the doorman in 20s. The man who, inexplicably, seemed to float through life as though some invisible hand was carrying him forward. The more they speculated, the more Vivian called. Twice a week became 3 times. Then 4. She never explained the rules or the timing, and he never pressed. 50 grand a swim was too good to question. But something about her voice on the phone now. It was softer, almost intimate, and yet more urgent. "Tomorrow. Midnight sharp," she said one evening. "And don't eat anything for 12 hours beforehand." Caleb's pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because I said so," she replied and hung up. The money had changed everything. His wardrobe, his confidence, the way people looked at him, but it had also built a quiet, gnawing question in the back of his mind. Why these rules? And what exactly happened on the west side of that pool? The swim that night had been quick, 20 minutes, no strange rules, no champagne-fueled monologue from Vivian. Just her usual stare and the envelope waiting on the table. Caleb was toweling off when he caught it. A flicker. Not from the pool lights or the city skyline, but from the penthouse across the narrow gap of rooftop air. One window, half shielded by sheer curtains, pulsed with a brief light, like a bulb catching before dying. Then it happened again. And again. And in that moment, Caleb could swear he saw the faint silhouette of a person, still, deliberate, facing directly toward him. His chest tightened. The wind picked up on the rooftop, cool against his wet skin, and he forced himself to look away. Vivian didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. "Envelopes on the chair," she said, not looking up from her phone. Caleb grabbed it, slipped on his clothes, and made his way to the service elevator, that flickering light gnawing at his thoughts. The next morning, he stepped into the marble lobby with a coffee in one hand, earbuds in, head down. But he didn't get far before a voice sliced through the quiet. "You're the new boy." Caleb stopped, looked up. A tall, elegant woman in a tailored trench coat was leaning casually against the mailroom doorway. She had the kind of poise that came from old money, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "You're the janitor," Caleb said slowly. She smiled faintly. "Oh, that's what we're calling it now?" She pushed off the wall, heels clicking on the polished floor, and stopped close enough for him to catch her perfume, something expensive and faintly spicy. "Be careful," she said softly, almost like a warning to herself. "That woman collects people the way others collect art. And you're a very interesting piece." Caleb laughed under his breath. "I think you've been reading too many mystery novels." She didn't laugh. "You think this is funny? Everyone here is watching you, whether you notice or not. And we've all seen what happens to the ones she likes." He wanted to ask what she meant. He wanted to press her for every detail. But she gave him no chance, just a final, lingering look before walking away, leaving the faint click of her heels echoing behind her. The rest of the day, the building felt different. The concierge who normally gave him a nod now watched him openly as he passed. The doorman's polite smile seemed tight, rehearsed. Even the silence of the marble hallways had a weight to it, like the air before a summer storm. Twice, he caught people glancing at him as elevator doors slid shut. Once, he swore he heard his name hissed between two women near the resident lounge. By the time his shift ended, the unease had sunk deep under his skin. That night, he found himself back on the rooftop. Vivian was in the pool when he arrived, her silk robe folded neatly on a chair, her silver hair catching the glow of the city. "Lovely night," she said, voice calm, almost casual. Caleb glanced toward the opposite building. No flicker. No silhouette. But the curtains in that penthouse window were drawn tight now, like someone hiding their view. He slid into the water, trying to shake the feeling that he was the main act in a show he didn't understand. When he left, Vivian called after him. "Caleb," turned. Her smile was faint, deliberate. "They're curious about you. Let them be. Curiosity can be dangerous." She didn't elaborate. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, and by the time he reached the lobby, the trench coat woman's warning was ringing in his ears. "Everyone here is watching you." For the first time, Caleb wasn't sure if the 50 grand was worth it. The penthouse looked nothing like the quiet, shadowed sanctuary Caleb had come to know. Tonight, it was ablaze with golden light, chandeliers dripping crystal fire, and the hum of laughter and clinking glasses spilling from every room. Vivian's charity gala was the kind of event that could end up in page 6, a sea of black-tie guests, champagne towers, and million-dollar smiles. A string quartet played somewhere near the grand staircase, their music weaving through the air like a carefully choreographed whisper. And there was Caleb, standing near the marble bar in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit Vivian had sent to his apartment earlier that week. The fabric hugged his shoulders, the silk tie knotted just right. He looked nothing like a janitor tonight. He looked like he belonged here. Except he didn't. He was serving drinks, not sipping them. Vivian swept through the crowd like a queen among courtiers, her floor-length gown shimmering with every step. People leaned in when she spoke, laughed at the smallest gesture. Caleb noticed she never let anyone stand too close for too long, always moving, always keeping the flow of the room under her control. Around the second hour, when the champagne had softened the edges of everyone's voices, Caleb started catching snippets of conversation. They weren't about the auction items or the charity cause. They were about her. Tragic, poor thing right there by the pool. Everyone said it was an accident, but you know. One slip and... The words were muffled by laughter, the kind people use when saying something they shouldn't. Caleb kept pouring champagne, pretending not to hear, but his mind caught on that one word, pool. Later, as he refilled glasses near the terrace doors, two men in tuxedos leaned against the railing outside, cigars glowing in the night. "Hard to believe it's been 9 years, one said. 9 exactly, the other replied. Same week, every year, she throws something like this. And well, you know the rest. The first man exhaled smoke, shaking his head. Yeah. By the pool. Awful way to go. But if you ask me, he glanced back toward the crowd, accidents don't usually have that many unanswered questions. Caleb's pulse kicked. He worked the rest of the night in a haze, moving between guests like an actor hitting his marks. But his mind was replaying every swim he'd done for Vivian. She'd never explained why certain nights, why the strange precision, 8:15 p.m. sharp, or wait until the moon clears that building, or tonight, only 20 laps. But now, pieces began to shift into place. It wasn't random. Each swim fell on a date that meant something to her. Anniversaries of deaths? Losses? Near midnight, the party reached its peak. Vivian was on the balcony now, glass raised for a toast. To generosity, she said, voice cutting through the music, and to the beautiful, fleeting nature of life. The crowd laughed softly, clinking glasses. Caleb caught her eye across the room. She smiled, just for him, small, deliberate, and almost unreadable. At that moment, he realized something else. Her gaze during the swims, the intense, almost surgical way she'd watch his every movement. It wasn't about lust or amusement. It was about memory. She wasn't just watching him. She was remembering. When the last guest drifted out and the penthouse returned to its usual quiet, Vivian approached him with a glass of leftover champagne. You clean up well, she said, eyes traveling over the suit she'd chosen for him. Thanks, he replied, his voice steady despite the churn in his chest. Some party. She smiled faintly. It's important to honor certain nights. He wanted to ask why these nights? Why the pool? But her tone, and the way she turned and walked toward the dim hallway, told him the conversation was over. For now. The night began with an envelope. Vivian slid it across the bar in her penthouse, the crisp weight of it undeniable even before Caleb opened it. He'd seen plenty of envelopes from her before, each one thick with money, but never this thick. When he counted the stacks inside, his breath caught. $500,000, she said, almost casually, like she was talking about the weather. He looked up. For one swim. Her red lips curled into the faintest smile. One swim tonight. During the party. Guests will be inside, so you won't see them. And, she paused, her eyes sharpening. No matter what you hear, you don't stop swimming. Caleb laughed nervously. That's oddly specific. I'm being clear, she replied, stepping closer. The scent of her perfume, white lilies and something darker, spicier, filled the space between them. An hour later, the rooftop pool glowed like a slice of turquoise under the Manhattan skyline. Inside, the party was already in full swing. The glass walls muffled the noise of music and chatter, but Caleb could still see the glitter of gowns and the gleam of tuxedos as guests mingled. He stripped down, the night air cool against his skin, and slid into the water. The first lap was smooth, mechanical. The second easy. By the third, the champagne buzz from earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by a sharp awareness of every sound, the rhythmic splash of his strokes, the faint hum of heaters, and the throb of bass from inside. By the seventh lap, something shifted. A crash. Muffled but unmistakable. Glass breaking. He froze mid-stroke before remembering her words. Don't stop swimming. He pushed off the wall, heart thudding harder now, trying to focus on the motion. Pull, kick, breathe, but the noises grew clearer. A man's voice, shouting. Then another crash. Somewhere between lap 12 and 13, there was a sound that didn't belong to any party. A sharp, metallic clang followed by the splinter of wood. Caleb's arms ached, but the thought of $500,000, and the strange urgency in Vivian's voice, kept him moving. The shouting turned into something uglier. A woman's scream. Caleb's mind spun. He pictured Vivian, her silk robe, her calm gaze, and forced himself to keep going. The water felt heavier now, each lap stretching longer, his muscles burning with lactic acid. Halfway through lap 18, there was another sound, not from inside the penthouse, but from somewhere behind him, near the pool deck. A dull thud, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged across marble. He didn't dare turn his head. He didn't dare stop. By lap 20, the sounds had faded. The muffled music returned, as if nothing had happened. Caleb slowed, his breath ragged, before finally hoisting himself out of the water. The rooftop felt different, colder, as if the temperature had dropped in the last 10 minutes. Then he saw it. Near the edge of the pool deck, where the marble met the glass railing, there was a dark smear. His eyes followed it, a streak, thick and glistening under the pool lights. Blood. His pulse spiked. "Vivian?" he called, his voice cracking. No answer. He grabbed a towel and stepped closer. The smear led toward the stairs that descended to the penthouse. The glass doors were still shut, the party noises distant now, like a different world entirely. When he reached the doors, he peered inside. The main room was empty. The bar stood half-stocked, glasses abandoned mid-drink. A trail of red dotted the pristine marble floor. Vivian was gone. The envelope with the rest of the payment was sitting on a side table, untouched, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Caleb stared at it, heart pounding, torn between the instinct to grab the money and run, and the pull to find out what had just happened. Somewhere deep down, he knew one thing. Whatever had gone down tonight, it wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Caleb had barely slept. The image of the blood smear wouldn't leave his mind, and every sound in his tiny apartment made him flinch. By morning, the $500,000 was still sitting in the envelope on his kitchen counter like it was glowing, taunting him. At noon, he dragged himself back to work. The lobby of the building felt different now, heavier somehow, as if the air itself was holding a secret. The doorman, usually chatty, avoided his eyes. A pair of tenants stepped out of the elevator and stopped talking mid-sentence when they saw him. As Caleb crossed toward the service hallway, a hand gripped his arm. It was Frank, the building's oldest security guard, 60-something, wiry, always smelling faintly of cigar smoke. His eyes darted toward the security cameras, then he pulled Caleb into a side corridor where no one could see them. "You were up there last night?" Frank said quietly. Caleb froze. "Up where?" Frank's gaze hardened. "Don't play dumb." "The rooftop." "The pool." Caleb's mouth went dry. "What about it?" Frank took a slow breath, as if deciding how much to say. "You know her husband died up there, right?" Caleb had heard whispers before, but nothing concrete. "They said it was an accident." "That's what the cops called it," Frank said. "Officially. But if you work here long enough, you hear the real story." Caleb's heartbeat kicked up. "What real story?" Frank glanced around again, lowering his voice to a rasp. "They found him floating. Naked. Just like you." A cold shiver slid down Caleb's spine. Frank continued. "But here's the part they didn't print in the papers. His death, it wasn't just some drunk slip. It was a ritual. There were candles. Symbols carved into the wax. A bottle of champagne sitting at the edge of the pool, half drunk. No one could explain it, but everyone knew Vivian was the only one there that night." Caleb's voice cracked. "You're saying she?" Frank held up a hand. "I'm saying nothing. But I am telling you this, she's been repeating it. Every year. Same night. Same time. Always a man, always naked, always swimming. You think you're the first? You're not even the fourth." The hallway seemed to tilt under Caleb's feet. "Why?" he whispered. Frank's jaw tightened. "Inheritance clause. Old money family. Sick kind of legal loophole. Rumor has it she only got her full payout if she could prove, in some twisted way, that she was recreating the spirit of her marriage." Caleb's stomach turned. "That's insane." "Yeah," Frank said, stepping closer. "And the real kicker? That $500,000 swim you just did, that was the last piece she needed. You just closed the book on whatever game she's been playing for a decade." Caleb's mind reeled. Images from the last few months crashed together. Vivian's sharp gaze during the swims, her obsession with dates and times, the way she'd watch him like he was hitting marks in a script. The anniversary parties. The champagne. And last night, the shouting, the breaking glass, the blood. He backed up, needing air. If that's true, then where is she now? Frank shrugged, his expression grim. If she's smart? On a plane. If she's not? Well, he trailed off, letting the silence finish the thought. That night, Caleb didn't go home. He sat in a late-night diner 2 blocks away, the city neon washing across his coffee cup. Every time the door opened, he expected Vivian to walk in, smiling, unapologetic, like nothing had happened. But she didn't. Instead, the only thing that kept replaying in his mind was Frank's final warning as they'd parted ways. Money's one thing, kid. But being part of someone's ritual? That sticks to you. Forever. Caleb stared down at his untouched pie, wondering if he'd just become a permanent part of Manhattan's darkest secret, and whether that envelope on his counter was a blessing or a curse. For the first 24 hours after the $500,000 swim, Caleb walked around like he had a target painted on his back. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sudden noise made his neck snap around. It wasn't until he overheard the building concierge whispering on the phone that his fear started to twist into something stranger. Yes, the penthouse. During the event. He never saw a thing. Caleb slowed his pace, pretending to study the mailboxes, but his ears locked onto every word. She had him swimming the whole time. Smart move. No one would look twice. The concierge's eyes flicked up and caught Caleb staring. The conversation ended instantly, phone shoved into a pocket. That night, Caleb went back to the rooftop. The pool was silent, lit by that eerie underwater glow that made everything look otherworldly. He sat on the edge, the city sprawling beneath him, trying to piece it together. If Vivian had wanted to hurt him, she would have had dozens of opportunities. No, whatever happened during that $500,000 swim, it wasn't about him. And then it hit him. The shouting. The breaking glass. It had all come from inside the penthouse, not near the pool. While he had been keeping everyone's attention outside, someone had been inside. Someone important. He dug through his memory of the gala earlier that week. Among the champagne-soaked conversations, he remembered a particular guest. A tall man with slicked-back hair, cufflinks shaped like tiny daggers, and a smile that never reached his eyes. They'd called him Lawrence. Frank, the security guard, had muttered something about him being one of the Whitmore heirs, another old-money dynasty like Vivian's. Caleb didn't know the politics of that rarefied heir, but he did know one thing. Those people didn't casually drop by for a friendly visit. Caleb's stomach sank as the puzzle started snapping together. Vivian hadn't just been throwing an event that night. She'd orchestrated it. Every detail, the private swim, the specific timing, the warning not to stop no matter what he heard, was designed for one purpose, to make him the perfect distraction. Everyone on the rooftop, including security, had been focused on him. No one would wonder why Vivian was inside with Lawrence. What happened up there? A blackmail? A confession? Something worse? He remembered the look on Lawrence's face earlier in the week, all smug confidence. Then, hours after the swim, the same man was nowhere to be seen, and there had been blood on the marble. Caleb left the rooftop, heart pounding. The building lobby felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had shifted closer. Frank was at the desk. Caleb leaned in. That guy at the gala. Lawrence. Did you see him after the event? Frank didn't look up from his crossword. Nope. Didn't see him leave. Didn't see him come back. Funny thing, though. Caleb waited. His car's still in the garage. Been there 2 days now. That night, Caleb couldn't shake the image, Vivian, with that diamond-cold smile, leaning in close to Lawrence in the candlelit penthouse. Her voice is low. His face shifted from arrogance to panic. Whatever she had on him, it had been enough to trap him there. And Caleb had been the cover story. He thought about the envelope on his counter. $500,000 for being an alibi to God knows. The scariest part? Vivian hadn't even called to thank him. Which meant one of two things. Either she was confident he'd never talk, or she was already planning her next move. It arrived without warning. No knock on the door, no signature required, just a plain, unmarked cardboard box sitting neatly against Caleb's apartment door like it had been placed there with surgical precision. He glanced down the hallway. The box was heavier than it looked. He carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and sliced through the tape. Stacks of crisp $100 bills spilled out, neatly bundled in thick rubber bands. He didn't need to count them, his gut already knew the number. $1 million. On top of the cash was a small ivory envelope. Inside, a single piece of paper, folded twice. Swim free, darling. We're both rich now. No signature. No explanation. But he didn't need one. Vivian. The TV was already murmuring in the background, some morning talk show cutting to breaking news. Caleb barely noticed until he heard her name. Socialite Vivian Harrow is believed to have fled the country. Interpol has issued a notice in connection with an ongoing investigation into alleged financial irregularities and the suspicious death of a Whitmore family heir. The image shifted to grainy paparazzi footage, Vivian, wrapped in a silk headscarf and oversized sunglasses, boarding a private jet at a coastal airstrip. She moved with her usual unshakable poise, even as photographers shouted questions she ignored. Caleb stood frozen, the note still in his hand. The story unfolded in quick, sharp cuts on the screen. Police officers carrying boxes out of her penthouse. Headlines flashing phrases like fraud network, inheritance dispute, and possible homicide investigation. They didn't mention him. Not once. And yet, every shot of that rooftop pool, with its turquoise shimmer and marble deck, made his stomach tighten. That afternoon, with the box of cash sitting in the center of his coffee table like a live explosive, Caleb found himself drifting toward the elevator. The rooftop was quiet when he stepped out. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the faint scent of chlorine. The pool was exactly the same, perfectly still, lit from beneath like some serene, artificial lagoon. But something in him knew it wasn't just water. He walked to the edge, staring down. On the glassy surface, his reflection stared back, but it didn't feel like his. The jawline was harder, the eyes sharper. Somewhere in those ripples, he could almost make out another face layered over his own. The man who had died here, naked, years ago. The one Vivian had been chasing through her strange ritual. The one whose last moments he had unknowingly reenacted over and over again. He sat on the marble edge, letting the memories roll over him. The first awkward swim, the strange instructions, the party whispers, the blood. $1 million in exchange for silence. Or complicity. Or maybe just for surviving the game she'd set in motion. The money would solve every practical problem he'd ever had. But the cost. The cost was the look in his own eyes now, reflected back from the water, colder, more calculating. He wondered if Vivian had always planned it this way. If she had known from that first elevator ride months ago that he would end up here, rich, free, and forever changed. Caleb reached into his pocket, feeling the weight of the folded note against his fingertips. He almost tossed it into the pool, watching it sink out of sight. But instead he slid it back into his pocket. Some things, he decided, were worth keeping, even if they burned you every time you touched them. When he finally left the rooftop, he didn't look back. The water would always be there, waiting. But so would the reflection.